They say Jesus. Come on, Jesus. That's the reason for Christmas. That's why we're celebrating this week, and we're going to have a great time because He came down in the flesh and the blood and was born and laid in a manger. Everybody say that's good news. All right, turn to your neighbor and say Merry Christmas to them. All right? Just be nice to them before you know what they got you for Christmas, and then after you can be mad. We got some great stuff going on. I'm very excited about today. I'm very excited about tomorrow night for our Christmas Eve service here at 5 o'clock. We're going to have a special candlelight service. We're going to be using real fire for those of you that are pyros, and it's going to be a great time. If you like to light things on fire, this is going to be the service for you, and it's going to be a blast. It's going to be a blast. You guys have your Christmas under control? Is it under control? You got everything ready to rock and roll? You got all your gifts spot? I was at the store yesterday, actually, which is just nutty. And I'm astounded by some people who actually wait till Christmas Eve to buy all of their gifts. There's a special place for you. It's called the Looney Bin. You know, we're finishing up today our series called Christmas Without Fear. We've been talking about it for the past 4 weeks, and if you're our guest today and you're just catching up today, don't worry, you can go on all of our social media outlets and you can catch up on the series. And coincidentally, if you are a guest today, you can fill out your Connect card, and after service, take it out to the Welcome Center. We got a special little gift to say thanks for being with us today. But we're going to finish up our Christmas series today called Christmas Without Fear. And let's just recap real quick on the things we've learned so far over the past 4 weeks. We learned about fear. We learned about the fear of being disappointed. Everybody had that fear of being disappointed. Zachariah and Elizabeth had that fear when they wanted a baby so bad, and the angel of the Lord came and visited them, and they're like, "Are you sure about this?" And then they had that fear of being disappointed. We learned about the fear of not being good enough. Anybody ever felt like that? It's like, man, I'm just not going to measure up. I'm not going to measure up. You know, today I was talking to somebody just after first service, and they said, how was the message? And I said, well, I don't know. She said to me, well, I heard that it was great. And I said, well, that's fantastic. She says, yes, but they were deaf and blind. I won't say who said any of that because that would never come from Nana's mouth. So we learned this fear of not being good enough. We learned about the fear of not being accepted. Have you ever been accepted? Feel like, man, I'm just not going to be accepted? Some of you visited a church, you're visiting today, and you feel like, man, I don't know if we're going to accept you. We accept you. That's why we have Panera Bread and a hot chocolate bar and food, right? Because you always feel more accepted when your mouth is full. Isn't that right? When you have stuff coming from you, it's like you feel like, man, I belong here. Because there's food. That's why we have food. So we dealt with that fear. We dealt with the fear of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen next. The what-ifs of life, the I don't knows of life, the who would have thought this would have happened. And today we're going to deal with the fear that you and I deal with on a regular basis. And we're going to deal with the last people in the Christmas story, King Herod and the wise men, and how they actually come to play in this story about how they deal with their fear. And they're dealing with the fear that you and I deal with on a regular basis, all the time in our life. We deal with this fear. And that is the fear of losing control. The fear of losing control. Anybody ever felt like that? Man, I am just going to lose control. I actually talked to my brother, Pastor Andy, just the other day, and he said, hey, what are you preaching on the last Christmas Sunday? And I said, well, I'm finishing up a series called Christmas Without Fear. We're talking about the fear of losing control. He said, are you going to sing the song, I'm about to lose control, and I think I like it? No, I'm not going to sing that song. But all of us have this drive and desire in our life to keep control of every aspect of our life. We don't want any part of our life to fall out of place, do we? We want to keep it focused and it has to go the way we want it to go. I don't want to lose control. And we feel like if we lose control, everything in our life, our self-worth, our value, and our purpose is all going to go to shambles. If my career doesn't go the way I determine it should go, if my finances don't go the way that I determine they should go, if my health doesn't go the way that I determine it should go, if my marriage doesn't go the way I determine it should go, if these things fall apart, then I will lose my value and my self-worth and my purpose. And we feel like, man, if I lose control. You ever had a situation where you lost control? The other day I was, a couple weeks ago, we were in Phoenix, and we were driving, and we got up in the morning, and we were going to go meet some friends, pastor friend of mine in Phoenix, and we said, okay, well, let's have breakfast before we go meet them, because Laura and I, when we're traveling, we like to try new places, some local places that people, like, and so we look on Yelp, and we're checking things out, and this place looks good. It's 15 minutes from our hotel, and it's kind of a roundabout to get to our friend's house, so we said, okay, we're going to go there, and we get there, and it's closed down. Now, I just want to let you know about me, little known fact, that when I don't have breakfast, I get hangry, right? You guys know what that is? And I'm a breakfast guy. First thing in the morning, I've got to have food. It restores my sanity, and coffee, okay? That's how I get close to God. Food and coffee. We're together, all of us. It's food, coffee, and Jesus. It's the magical trinity there. And so we get there and say, okay, well, Laura pulls out her little, smartphone, which is not very smart because it didn't tell us the restaurant was closed, and she punches in a new location. Well, let's try this place. And I'm like, okay. So we drive over there. It's another 15 minutes. And we get there. It's so sketchy, I can't even get out of the car. Like I pulled around the corner to find a new place, and I locked the doors. Like, I don't know if we're going to get out here. This is a little weird. So we didn't get out there, and we didn't go, and so finally we're searching, and finally she says, well, let's go to the Coffee Bean because we like the Coffee Bean. Now, before we go any further, let me explain to you how my wife follows Google Maps. Because we're driving down the road, and she's like this, and she keeps turning it. Well, we got to do this. Okay, maybe that's an over-exaggeration, but in my mind, that's what she does. And so we're going to go to the Coffee Bean, and now I'm starting to wither away to nothing. I haven't had breakfast yet. It's like 9:30, which is really late for me, and I'm about to lose control, and no one's going to like it. It's going to get bad. And so we're driving down the freeway to Coffee Bean, and guess what? Coffee Bean, apparently, we didn't know this as we got off the airport, or off the exit, it's in the airport. So we're driving to the airport. She goes, well, we'll just go in. I'm like, we're going to go through security to get to the Coffee Bean so I can have breakfast? Don't you understand how hangry I am right now? I'm losing control. So finally we said, fine, let's go to Starbucks. It was like our last choice. Let's go to Starbucks. They're everywhere. And so we drive, we find a Starbucks, and it drives us there, and it's a Starbucks inside of Vons. It's not even a real Starbucks. It's like a pretend poser Starbucks. It doesn't even have a place to sit down. What, am I going to sit down in the frozen food aisle and have my pastry and coffee? I'm losing control here. It was bad. It was bad. Turn to your neighbor and just tell him right now, please don't lose control. We all have this fear, the fear of losing control. We have this fear of losing control. And listen, all jokes aside, it's a serious thing for people. Because we try so hard to hold on to our life and this world that we've built for ourselves. And then we feel like if it falls apart, I'm ruined. I'm ruined. Let's look and see what happens in the story of King Herod and the wise men. All right? Because they dealt with this fear of losing control. In chapter 2, Matthew chapter 2, this is how the story goes. And if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. If not, you can follow along on the screen. Here's what it says. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we've come to worship him. Isn't that why you came to church today? Did you come to worship him today? Come to worship Jesus? That's why the wise men were going to see Jesus, so they could worship him. King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. And he called a meeting of the leading priests and the teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they said. "For this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when they first saw the star. And then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star that they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. And it went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. You know, when we first come to know Jesus, it should fill us with joy. And that joy should carry us through the rest of our life. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Right? Even David prayed, said, "God, restore unto me the joy of my salvation." Because life begins to pick away at us, doesn't it? It begins to have us, beat down all the time. Where it's like, man, I'm losing control. Well, one thing we shouldn't lose control of is the joy of the Lord that is our strength. And they entered the house and they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshipped him. And they opened their treasure chests and they gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time for them to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Let me ask you a question. What would you do to stay in control? Or maybe a better question is this: what have you done to keep control? We do some crazy things to stay in control. We will sacrifice our moral standards to stay in control. We'll cheat a little on the side to stay in control. We'll work the angles to stay in control. We'll do what it takes to stay in control. They say power corrupts, right? But absolute power corrupts completely or absolutely. We just try to, I got to keep control of it. Herod was so disturbed, the Bible says, which means he was so afraid that the King of the Jews had come, the coming of the Messiah had come, that he began to panic. I don't have time to get on the whole history of Herod, but he had a false title in history called Herod the Great. He was not great. He was a tyrant. He was an evil guy. And he's afraid. He's going, wait, what are you talking about? Another guy's coming, a king of the Jews. And he believed what the wise men had told him and the scribes had told him where Jesus was to be born. Somehow, in a miraculous way, we don't know how, the wise men knew it was time for Jesus to be born, the Messiah, the coming promised one. I don't know how they had that knowledge, but some miraculous way God had revealed it to them. And then when they come to Herod and they tell him, he calls in the scribes. Now let me just tell you who the scribes were. In case you don't know who the scribes were, their responsibility was to write down the scriptures. They knew it forward and back. They knew everything about it. So they were able to quote to Herod, oh, here's what it says in the scriptures, because they knew it. In fact, they were so serious about writing the scriptures. History tells us that when they were writing the name of God, that if someone was to walk in, even if it was the king, they wouldn't stop writing his name because that's how holy they thought it was. And they kept it holy. They were so specific. These guys knew what they were talking about. And it freaked Herod out so bad, he was greatly disturbed. And in fact, so much so that he did what he thought was the appropriate response to keep control of his situation. Watch what he did in Matthew chapter 2. Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him, and he sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. You know what that means? They killed babies. They killed babies. So to keep control, to keep his power, to keep his prestige, to keep his placement, to keep his popularity, to keep his appointed position, he started killing babies. oh man, this baby's going to ruin my life. This is one of the reasons, I don't want to get too political in the church, but I will say this is one of the reasons morally and biblically that we as the church do not support abortion. Because a lot of people have an abortion because they want to keep control of their life. This baby's going to mess up my future. I don't want to have the responsibility of it. And so they have an abortion. And maybe you've dealt with that pain in your life. And maybe you've made that decision. I believe that God can give you healing and God can give you forgiveness. But we do some crazy things, don't we, to keep control. Crazy things. People throughout history have done radical, atrocious things to keep control. You and I have done that too, just on different levels maybe. You know, when we try to keep absolute control in our lives, we end up making some bad decisions, don't we? Ever been there? And then later on, you get past it, and you're like, man, why did I do that? That was a terrible decision. Wasn't as smart as I thought I was. So we get into this place where we're trying to keep control of every situation, and because we're trying to keep control and we're trying to be the leader of our life and we're trying to be the supreme ruler of our life, we do things that we think is things that are morally right and morally accurate and what we feel is the best decision for us to make, and it turns out maybe we weren't as smart as we thought. The reason why Herod was so mad is because he wasn't supposed to be in control. In fact, he wasn't the rightful king of Judah. The whole area of Judea, he wasn't supposed to be in control. He was actually appointed by the Romans. Just to give you a little history behind it. He was appointed by the Romans, which was kind of in violation of what God had said years and years ago that David, King David, the king of Judah, would always have a king sitting on the throne for all time. In fact, let's look at that verse right now. In Genesis 49:10, it says all the way back in Genesis, in the prophecy, it says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. That's Jesus. So he wasn't supposed to be the king. No wonder he was a little intimidated, because Jesus is the king. And he was coming into the world. You see, and we see two totally different results and totally different ways of how to handle this idea of keeping control. We see King Herod and we see the wise men. King Herod tried to keep control away from Jesus. Has that ever been you? You know, we do this all the time. We say, okay, Jesus, you can have me on Easter and Christmas, and that's it. Every other day is mine. And we try to compartmentalize God's involvement in our life, and we say, hey, you can have me up to this point, but other than that, man, do not touch, because that belongs to me. And that's what Herod was doing. He said, man, I'm going to keep control away from Jesus. You were not created or designed or purposed to keep control away from Jesus. You see, then we see the wise men. The wise men surrendered control to Jesus. That's a totally different outlook. That's a totally different response. That's a totally different mindset in their life, that they actually gave control to Jesus instead of taking it away from Jesus. I surrender. Look what they did. Matthew chapter 2. It says, when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. Everybody say joy. They were filled with joy. And they entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests, and they gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So here's what I want to do. Over the next few minutes, I want to give you a few things that we can learn from the response of the wise men on how you and I can actually surrender control to Jesus. That's what we need to do. We need to surrender control to Jesus. Turn to your neighbor and say, I need to surrender control. Because we need God in our life. And watch what the wise men did. How do you surrender control to Jesus? Number one, you have to worship Jesus as the supreme leader of your life. The supreme leader of your life. Sometimes we treat Jesus like a Facebook friend. Right? Like, well, okay, let's see what he posted today. If I like it, I'll stop the scroll. If I don't, I'm going to keep on going. You know, and we want him in parts of our life, but not all of our life, and therein lies the problem. You see, Jesus came to earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords so that He could have supreme control of our life. And I think it's high time we gave Him control of our life. Say, God, you know what? I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't know what the rest of today's going to bring. But Lord, I just want You to be involved in it, and I want You to lead me through it. That's called giving Him control. It's an interesting thing about the wise men because in history they're called magi or magicians. And in the Persian culture they were priests and philosophers and educated men. But in other parts of culture they're also known as magicians that were involved in dark arts and witchcraft and sorcery. And they were going to call all kinds of bad stuff. So when these guys came somehow to worship Jesus, the Messiah, the King, they're self-proclaimed, as they said it, they spoke it, the King of the Jews. And they came into where Jesus and Mary were. And the first thing that they did was they bowed in worship. If it's true, and history is accurate in this case, and they were sorcerers and into evil witchcraft and things like that, how fitting for people who once lived in darkness to bow down before Him who is the light of the world. To surrender supreme control to Him who is the author and the maker of the heavens and the earth. To Him who is the sun and the light of the world. You see, and we can do that when we surrender complete control to God. When we surrender complete control of our life to Jesus Christ, what we're saying is, Jesus, I want You to take every dark and dirty, dingy part of my life, and I'm going to bow it down and worship to You, and I'm going to surrender it to You, and I'm going to let You shine Your good light into it so that it could be no more a hindrance in my life to the purpose You have for me. I relinquish control of all these secret places, and I give them to You. You see, and that's what the wise men did. They traveled a long ways to do it. You can do it right where you're sitting. I just give it to You. I give it to You. You see, in Romans 14:11 it says this, as it's written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before Me and every tongue will acknowledge God. One translation says, and every tongue will confess that He is Lord. That He's Lord. There's a lot of different interpretations of this as far as what it means in the end, but here's what I believe it means in the end, and I'm probably 100% right and everybody else is wrong. So there's that. Is this. I believe that we're living in the last days, and we're coming up to the last day when Jesus will come again, right? And He will judge the righteous and the wicked. And when that time comes, I believe whether you're righteous through Jesus Christ or you're wicked because you rejected Him, every person in past history and future history, wherever, will bow and give acknowledgement that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That He's Lord. You surrender that control to Him as the supreme leader of your life. Let me tell you something. As you get ready to go into 2019, let me tell you the number one goal you can set for your life. Make Jesus the Lord of your life. Amen. In every area of your life, make Him the Lord of your life. The second thing we learn from the wise men is this. We have to hold nothing back from Him. Hold nothing back from Him. You know, we say, okay, you can have this much of me, God, but no more. What do you want for Christmas? You know, if you finish the song, all I want for Christmas is what? You think, you baby, right? Or my 2 front teeth, right? What do you want for Christmas? If you look at the story of the wise men, they actually had the first gift-giving Christmas. They came in and they gave Him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And their representation is way more than just things. Let me just real quickly give you a kind of an idea, an understanding of what it means of the gifts that they gave Jesus in that time. They gave Him gold. Now, in every generation, gold is a valuable commodity. Everybody wants it. I want gold. And we like it. But it represented way more than that, because what it meant for the wise men, it was a surrendering to His royalty, that He was the king. That He was the king. And it was also a surrendering of their financial future. Maybe as you get into the next year, you're like so compartmentalized with your finances, and it's good to be a planner, it's good to be prepared. But sometimes we feel like that is the source of our security. What I have or what I don't have in the bank. And I know that sometimes we fall in hard times. I get it. Been there, done that. I own a house on that street. It's not worth anything. But what if we actually started living our life, we say, God, I'm going to surrender everything to you, even my financial future. And whatever you have for me, whether a lot or a little, I'm going to thank you for it. It also was a surrendering to the supporting the ministry. History tells us that when, the Scriptures tell us that when Joseph and Mary were fleeing from all these people that were trying to kill Jesus, that they had to go from place to place and city to city. Guess what that means? It's expensive. They didn't have Uber. They had to feed their donkey. They had to rent places to live. They had to do all the kinds of stuff, and Joseph was just a poor carpenter. And so God sent wise men from the east all the way to Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus to give them money so that the ministry that Joseph and Mary had of overseeing the upbringing of the Lord would be taken care of. That's amazing. That's how our financial future can benefit. That's how we say, okay, Lord, I'm gonna have you have your way in every area of my life. I submit to your royalty and I submit my finances to you, and I'm going to support what you have me to support. And you do that and you'll be better off. The next thing we see that they gave was the frankincense. Frankincense was often used for worship. They would light it and it would smoke in the air and be a fragrant aroma. The Bible talks about it often, different incense offered to the Lord, and that's a surrender to His holiness. So you know that every time you worship God, you're surrendering to His holiness. That's what worship is. God, you are holy and I'm not. In fact, this is going to be real freeing for some people. Just turn to your neighbor and say, I am not holy. You're not. God's holy. God's holy. Some of you are like, man, I'm not saying that because I am. The next thing we see that the wise men gave was myrrh. And myrrh was an embalming spice. It was they got it from a tree, and they had all kinds of stuff that, in fact, when you read the account of Jesus when He was buried in the tomb and the women went to the tomb, they were carrying this. And it was a sign of surrender from the wise men of His sacrifice on the cross, that one day He would die for the sins of the world, for your sins and my sins. He was going to die. This is what these gifts represent. Now we could go way into these things. We don't have time today of all the meaning that they imply and they signify. But let's just call it for what it is. It was a surrendering of their entire life to Jesus Christ. And I feel like Scriptures teach us to do that. I see it all through the Scriptures. That God wants not just part of us, but all of us. What would happen to this church? What would happen to your life? What would happen to your career if all of it, all of you, every aspect of it, every nickel and dime, every cough and hiccup, every joke and serious conversation, every travel plan was surrendered to the Lord? And we lived our life with this heart and this mind to say, God, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I can't control it, but I want to give it to you. And I want to surrender it to you because you're better at handling those things than I am. And I think we would be better off. The last thing we learn from the wise men is this: we never go back to your old life. Never go back to your old life. You ever say this? I miss the old days. I miss the old days. Way back when, yesterday. Today will be an old day. Right? Did you know that? Today will be an old day tomorrow. And there's no changing it. But we have this weird nostalgic thing in our mind where we always wish that we could go back to when it was when, And we think we were happier back then in our mind's eye. But if you actually were to think a little harder, you would probably remember all the times you complained about then too. Just like you complain about today. If you're a person like I am, you do that too, don't you? And we complain and we murmur, and there's all kinds of things we don't like about today. But somehow 10 years from now, we'll wish that then was right now because today was perfect somehow. I don't get it. But we do this all the time with sin. Somehow in sin, and somehow and when we're not walking with God, is we get in this weird mindset where we think, well, I was happier when I was doing this. Or I was happier when I was with him or with her. Or I was happier when I did that. And then all of a sudden, the things we used to do when God wasn't in our life have this weird, strange, erotic appeal to us. And we think to ourselves, oh man, that's what I need to be doing. And then it begins to tempt us, and we begin to inch closer and closer back to the ways of the old man. We need to get rid of that man. Because watch what happened. Matthew chapter 2:12 says, when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route. For God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Some of you just need to not return to Herod. You need to not go there. Knock it off. Move past it. Be done with it. You know, I don't know everybody's spiritual relationship with the Lord here today. But I do know this. Some of you, maybe all of us, need to really work hard at leaving our old life behind. Because God's got a whole new life for you. And you need to stop toying around with the things of this world. You need to stop toying around with your provocative nature that's tempted by the things of this world, that wants everything to do with everything else but Jesus. That's a sad road to go down. It's a sad road. You see, Jesus said this in Matthew 16:25. He says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. See, this is totally opposite of what the culture teaches us. Jesus always is in contrast to what culture teaches us. Jesus said if you really want to find your life, it's not necessarily about the next success book you get or the next couple letters you get past your degree. All those things can be great in life and they can help you. But if you really want to find your life, if you really want to have some meaning, if you really want to find some peace and significance, if you really want to live without fear, if you really want to deal with the garbage life is going to throw at you, you need to lose your life and find me. Because that's where it's at. That's where it's at. You lose your life, you'll find it. 2 Corinthians 5:17, it says, this means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. And the old is gone and the new life has begun. I firmly believe that when the wise men left, that encounter with Jesus, that first encounter with the joy of the world, that their life was forever changed. That they left there wiser than when they arrived. That there was something that happened in their life when they heard the account of Mary and Joseph and them telling them of the angels that visited them and the shepherds that came to visit them and all the things that God had told them and the things that came to pass and how it was a miraculous birth and how they were betrothed to be married and all the things and all the fears that they dealt with and how God helped them overcome all the fears, and they began to explain all these things to the wise men. The wise men could do nothing else but be transformed. That no longer did they leave there thinking, I can control everything in my life by the knowledge that I have in my brain. But now I surrender it to Him who is the wisest of all, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And I lay my life down to Him. And I think the wise men left there wiser than when they arrived. Because now they had found Jesus. See, you and I deal with this fear all the time, this fear of losing control. And can I just say to you, church, losing control will probably be the best thing you ever did. And you let Jesus take control. And you let Him be the one to direct you. You know, I was talking to somebody after first service, and they had recommitted their life to the Lord in first service, which is awesome. And he said to me, he says, man, I've just been really struggling with this whole thing, and won't get all the details of his life. And he's like, you know, I don't know. He goes, but I just really want to serve the Lord. And I said, that's great. And I told him, and I tell you the same thing. I said, you know, your spiritual growth is up to you. Your relationship with Jesus and the depth of that relationship and the strength and the power of that relationship is up to you. Jesus said, if you seek me, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. You see, if you want to go into 2019, you want to go through the rest of this holiday season, and you want to really find peace, you really want to get rid of your fear, you really want to get over these obstacles that have been hanging you up for so long, it's time to surrender to Jesus. Because He's the answer. And He's the one who can eliminate you from all fear. Right? That's why He said, peace I leave with you, peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. He gives us peace in a different way. He gives us peace that can't be bought, can't be purchased, can't be found under the tree, but it can be found in Jesus.